I'm going to show you why most movement problems never fully resolve and what actually has to change in order for your body to move freely again. I've spent over 20 years in the movement, health, and performance world, and I've helped everyone from elite athletes to people that have been told that their symptoms or limitations are permanent. And if you're thinking, I've already tried stretching or strengthening or rehab or corrective exercise, that actually makes sense because most approaches fail for the same reason. Most people treat movement as a muscle problem and they don't actually go to where it starts, which is the nervous system. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 6 principles I use to retrain movement at the level it's actually controlled, the brain. Which means this will matter most if you're most interested in why things change as opposed to just collecting more tools to put in your tool belt. This is important because the longer the nervous system practices protective patterns, the more likely it is to default to those patterns again, even when nothing is structurally wrong. And most people don't realize that that's exactly what's happening. That's why I'll show you how neurologically connected everything is and why things like neuroplasticity, assess, reassess, isolated joint movements, and training on one side of the body are all super important for actually rewiring your brain. So without further explanation, here are the 6 principles, and it's going to astonish you when you hear them because most people are never taught these. Let's dig right in. Number 1, all movement starts in the brain. Here's what that means. Most people think movement starts primarily in the muscle, that the muscle controls the joint, therefore the muscle is the problem when there's an issue at a joint area. Maybe I have knee pain, or I have elbow pain, or I have shoulder pain. Most people look solely at the muscle, but muscles don't act in isolation. Muscles are subservient to the brain, to the nervous system. When you go to contract the muscle, that muscle doesn't fire on its own. It is told to contract by the brain. So the muscle needs a nervous system to fire it, and that nervous system needs a brain to control it. Yet, most people who are struggling with pain or movement issues, they're never taught about how the brain actually controls movement. They're taught that the muscle drives everything. Here's the problem with the muscle-forward model of movement. Muscles, they cannot initiate movement. They can contract, but they cannot decide, they cannot initiate. The nervous system does that. They can only respond to what the nervous system tells them to do. The nervous system can turn muscles up, make them stronger, or the nervous system can turn muscles down and make them weaker. And so if muscles were the true driver of movement, then the state that you're in wouldn't matter. You could move without any sort of sensory input, or the sensory inputs that you're getting wouldn't affect your movement. Your coordination level wouldn't change with stress. You wouldn't walk different when you wake up in the middle of the night and try to navigate your room and you can't see anything. Fear wouldn't alter your strength or your range of motion. And pain wouldn't shut movement down instantly. But all of those things happen. Why? Because movement is the result of the brain, and the brain is processing all of those things first. So if you want to move better, whether that is being stronger or faster or just not hurting when you do basic things, just know that the brain is the one controlling the show. And movement is one of the most powerful ways to activate the brain. And if movement activates the brain and the brain is actually running the show, then it's important to know that your brain can change. And that leads us to the next concept, which ties everything together. And that is the concept of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the rule, not the exception. What this means is that your brain can change. And it blows me away that to this day, people are still not taught about how powerful of a change that can be. Your brain controls everything from your movement, to the thoughts you think, to the feelings that you feel, to how you can focus your attention, to how you respond in a conversation. All of that is an output of your brain, is a byproduct of the function and health of your nervous system. Now, fortunately, more and more people are starting to talk about neuroplasticity, but it's often treated as a singular, isolated thing that only occurs in certain contexts like meditation or mindfulness. The reality is neuroplasticity is happening all the time, whether you intend for it to or not. It is the rule, not the exception. And so the thoughts that you have, the movements that you have, the way you feel, that's all the result of how your brain is functioning. And you can practice certain thoughts and get really good at certain thoughts, or you can relearn or unlearn some of those thought patterns to actually improve how you think and feel and move throughout the day. Neuroplasticity also applies to injuries. Anytime you have an injury, your brain knows it. Your brain knows that when you sprain your ankle, something's going on down there. Now, let's take it a step further. If you sprain your ankle, every time you walk, you're going to change your gait. You're going to change how you walk and how much pressure you put on that foot. That's going to change the sensory information going to your brain. That's going to change how your brain coordinates the movement of that leg or the rest of the body to kind of shift your weight off of that ankle, which means that every time you have an injury, you're also changing not just the structure of the injury, but the structure and the firing of the brain. So we could say that every injury also has an impact on the brain. I've had back pain on and off for about 2 years now. And it started when I injured my knee. And that caused some compression of a nerve that traveled up to my lower back. And then over time, that actually started to show up as back pain. And when I thought it was healed, I was able to get back to doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And within a few weeks of doing Jiu-Jitsu again, I hurt my back. And I rested, I thought it was healed, but it kept coming back. It kept showing up again and again and again. And it still does now and again. The traditional line of thinking would be, okay, you need to strengthen your core, or you need to strengthen your back. Maybe you need to do the Stuart McGill Big 3 exercises or McKenzie method. You know what actually has helped my back the most? Doing drills for my vestibular system or my inner ear. See, if I only focused on the injured area and I never looked elsewhere for solutions, or never looked at other parts of my nervous system, well, I would never find that that part of my nervous system actually makes a big difference for how I feel, how I move. Because I knew that my brain was changing, I knew to look elsewhere in the nervous system for where I might have leverage to change my brain alongside that injury. If I only focus on what made me hurt, I would never focus so much on finding what makes me better. And so when your brain starts to function better, you become a better version of yourself. If you are struggling to get out of pain or overcome neurological symptoms, you need to understand that your brain is creating those symptoms and your brain can change. And this is why it's important to take a brain-based approach to solving those problems rather than a biomechanical one. And as you explore your system and you find the things that move the needle forward for you, and then you do those things more often, your brain will change. When your brain starts to change for the better, you become a better version of you. So if you want to bounce back from an injury or move better or just become a better version of you, you need to make neuroplasticity your target. If you're struggling to get out of pain or dealing with neurological symptoms, I have a free video at the link below that explains how I have helped hundreds of clients get out of pain and solve those problems using a brain-based approach. That link is free, it is below, check it out. Now that we're on the same page about neuroplasticity, now let's talk about ways that you can drive that neuroplastic change. Which brings us to point number 3, assess, reassess. Believe it or not all exercise is good for you. The adage of something is better than nothing can actually make things substantially worse. If you're creating activation in the nervous system that the nervous system responds poorly to, you can actually drive neuroplasticity in the wrong direction. And that can make things worse, not better. Your brain is always processing all of the information going on in you and around you. It then looks at all that information and decides, are you safe or are you in danger? If what you're doing for exercise creates signals that your brain doesn't trust, it will start to associate that activity with danger. And if your brain starts to associate that activity or that movement with danger, it can start to find ways to create symptoms or to create restrictions on that movement to prevent you from doing the thing that the brain thinks is dangerous. So if you're just powering through a workout because somebody told you that's what you needed to do, you may be making yourself worse. So how does the brain determine what's dangerous and what's safe? It does so by using something called a threat bucket. The threat bucket is an analogy of how your brain looks at all the things going on at the same time. And then some of those things are going to be considered threatening, and some of those things are going to be considered safe. And the things that are threatening are going to raise the threat level of that threat bucket. Once that threat level overflows, then you're going to see symptoms show up, things like pain or tightness or immobility or weakness or migraines or balance issues, whatever it is. And all that is a symptom that is created by the nervous system to prevent you from doing something that it thinks is unsafe. So if what you're doing is raising that threat level, and it gets to a certain point, your brain's going to say, stop doing that thing, and we're going to shut it down by creating symptoms that make movement less pleasant. And it does this by basically reacting to what it thinks is dangerous, not by something that logically wouldn't be dangerous. That danger level is determined by how clearly your brain can interpret that signal or that information. If it can't interpret it clearly, it's going to shy on the side of safety and treat it as a threat. It's easier for the brain to be wrong about something being dangerous and not than it is to think of something as being safe that's not. So your brain's always going to shy on the side of caution and protection. Your brain's number one job is survival. And so it is always going to be looking out for the best, most effective and efficient way to keep you alive, even if it doesn't make sense at the time. So in order to find the best ways to lower your threat, you need to assess and reassess your movement. So how it works is this. First, you're going to get a baseline range of motion. I'm kind of partial to the forward bend because of my back, but you're going to do a few reps. That way you know that any changes you see aren't because you're warming up. So once you have your baseline, you're then going to do a drill, any drill, doesn't matter what, and then you're going to reassess your range of motion. And depending on whether or not that range of motion gets better or gets worse, that's going to determine whether or not that was a good drill for you. Now that could be a vision drill, that could be a vestibular drill, that could be doing a back squat, that could be doing some breath work. Doesn't matter what. As long as you're assessing, you're going to be able to determine whether or not your nervous system actually responded favorably to that stimulus or not. And so we're looking for, did you get better? Did you get worse? And then that information steers the next decision you make. Do I do more of that thing? Do I do less of that thing? I'll also say this, if you're the type of person that likes to just jump from program to program or diet to diet or treatment to treatment, this is going to be a hard concept for you to grasp. This approach will frustrate you, but we don't guess here. We are very much interested in finding exactly what the nervous system needs, and we then go after that. So if you're not looking to take responsibility, this is not the approach for you. You should probably go watch another video. But if you do use this tool, what the assess-reassess process will do is it will help to make sure that you aren't guessing on what you're doing and that you know whether or not a certain movement or certain symptoms can be changed by way of interacting with your nervous system. And so as we start to remove threats from your life and we start to include more of the things that help you, your brain will not only start to change, it will change in the way that we want it to change. The goal is to find the things that don't raise your threat level and do more of those. Or if we find things that lower it, do those like crazy because your nervous system responds so well to them. When your nervous system gets better from a drill or an exercise, that is a sign that your nervous system wants more of it. So we give it that, and that drives the change that you're going to see. What this assess-reassess tool means for you is that if you are having a hard time with a certain movement or certain symptoms, it may actually mean that your threat bucket is too full. As we start to remove threats from your life, your threat level will decrease. And as your threat level decreases, movement gets easier. But if something that you're doing is actually making you worse, not better, or if it's making things hurt, or you're going to get tighter, or causes your symptoms to flare up, we want to know that so we know what it is we need to isolate and remove. It would be very, very wise to listen to your nervous system on this one. Now that you have a good idea of how to tell whether or not something is helpful to your nervous system, let's look at some of the more powerful ways to activate your nervous system. And that brings us to point number 4, isolated joint movement. Your brain has tons of joints that it's paying attention to all the time. Shoulder joints, elbow joints, hands, feet, wrist, ankle, knees, hips, all of it. Your brain has a map inside of it for how each of those joints should function. If any of those maps is not clear, the brain's not going to know how to predict what's going on in that joint when you go to use it. And if a joint doesn't move well, then it's going to have a hard time actually doing what it's supposed to do. Muscles cross joints, which means if that joint doesn't move well, that muscle's not going to move well. Do you think that'll make you more flexible? Probably not. Do you think it'll make you stronger? Probably not. Do you think your brain will feel safe about moving that joint? Probably not. So if you want to get stronger, if you want to get faster, if you want to have more endurance, or if you just want to move without pain, we need to make sure that the maps that your brain has for how everything should function are actually very clear. If those maps aren't clear, it's going to be very hard to actually control and predict the body safely. And as we know, when you have low predictability of an area of the body, if it's hard for your brain to predict a movement safely, it's going to detect it as threat. So we want to make sure that every joint you have is going to be clear in the brain. So if that brain area that controls that part of the body is not working well because of injury, because of not using it well, then we want to find out what it's going to take to make that movement work well. So sometimes you actually have to isolate those joints into smaller movements so that you can actually train the brain about how precisely those areas of the body function. This could be a major reason why you hurt. This could be a major reason why things are tight. And this could be a major reason why things are weaker than they should be. I remember the time I learned this firsthand. I went to a movement course that told me that if you do these really precise joint movements throughout the whole body, you'll get stronger. I said, that's BS. And so I tested it. I said, okay, I'm going to test this. I'm going to come back to the next course and I'm going to tell you you're wrong to your face. So for 3 months, I did nothing but really precise joint movements. And I tested my kettlebell strength before, I tested it after, and my before strength, I was able to press a 72-pound kettlebell. My strength after, I was able to press an 88-pound kettlebell. I didn't lift weights at all for those 3 months. The only time I would ever pick up a weight was to demonstrate an exercise for a client. And so for 3 months of doing nothing but precise joint mobility work, I got stronger, noticeably stronger, not just a little bit, but a lot of it. And that immediately sold me on the idea that, hey, having good control of your joints might matter. So what have I been doing since? Joint control work every single day. Now, does that mean I don't lift weights? No, I still lift weights. I still do things that I enjoy. But because I have good control of my body, all of the things I want to do, all of the things I do in addition to that are way easier and way less threatening. So if you move your joints really well, I promise you, you will see increases in strength, increases in endurance, increases in brain health, increases in every area of your life that matters. Moving your body well is important. So if you want to unlock your joints and unlock your full potential, you need to move every single joint thoroughly. One question I often get in response to this is, well, would you only train the joints that you know are sticky, or would you train everything? Would you only train the things that hurt, or would you train what moves well too? Well, it depends. Sometimes it's better to not train the body evenly. And that brings us to point number 5, unilateral training. You have two sides to the body. You have a left side and you have a right side. And you have a front and a back, and if you really want to go there, you have a top and a bottom. I'm just kidding. But for the sake of neurology, you have a left side and a right side. And so the right side of the body is controlled by the left cortex. Your left cortex does two things primarily. One is it takes in sensory information from the right side of the body, and it controls voluntary movement on the right side of the body. And your right cortex does the opposite. It takes in sensory information from the left side of the body, and it controls voluntary movement on the left side of the body. Now, why this matters is that if you have a brain that's not balanced from side to side, you have one side that's really strong and active and one side that's not, would it make sense to train both sides evenly? If I wanted to improve my brain function, it would be worthwhile to know which sides you need to train more than the other, because sometimes you have to. Now think of it like this. If you're right-handed, you live in a right-handed world, you open doors with the right hand, you drink coffee with your right hand, you drive with your right hand, you're going to get a lot of activation in that left cortex. So when the left cortex is constantly getting stronger, constantly getting activation, the movement maps are stronger on that left side of the brain, well, might I want to train more of my right side, or would I want to train more of my left side? Maybe I want to train more of my left side because I want to make sure that this side of my brain also has good maps for this side of the body. So sometimes you actually want to spend time not being even, because you're not really even and symmetrical to begin with. And so I may actually have a lot of training programs for clients where they're going to train one side 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much as the other side. Why? Because that's what their brain responds best to. So you want to find that out. You want to figure out which sides you need more of, because oftentimes bilateral work is going to not only make your brain stronger, but it's going to make those imbalances stronger too. We want to find out what's going to give you the best response. So sometimes you need to say, you know what, I'm going to do one side of the body and one side only. And that's the beauty of the brain. What your brain needs is different than what anyone else's brain needs. It's different than what my brain needs. It's different than the brain of anyone else in your family. Your brain is an individual snowflake. And so we want to find what gives your brain the best response and not put you in a generic one-size-fits-all protocol. And this could also be a big part of why a lot of treatment and rehab approaches that only focus on the injured area may miss the boat, because you may be targeting an area of the brain that doesn't need more activation. And that's creating imbalances, and that's causing the issues with your threat bucket, that's causing the issues with your joint clarity, and that's causing issues with how you're going to reassess. Because if you get the treatment, you don't get better, that could be why, because you're not actually getting a positive activation for your nervous system. And this can also be a big part of why some people actually hate exercise. Believe it or not, some people don't like exercise. And this could be why, because the modality of training that they're getting is not paying attention to how their brain responds. Sometimes your brain needs something very specific in your training, and if you're not getting that, or you're giving something to your brain that perpetuates these imbalances, that perpetuates your threat level, it's very easy to say, I just don't feel good when I do that. It's very easy to say, I don't want to do that today, because you're not actually helping the brain in those cases. So if you want to fix your brain, sometimes you need to embrace the idea of unilateral or one-sided training. Now this might be for days, this might be for weeks, this might even be for months. And you would do this until you no longer respond well to doing so. But if you want to fix things in a way that lasts, so your brain can get stronger where it counts most, you need to be able to do the right thing for the right amount of time. And that brings us to point number 6. You have to be consistent. Your brain changes based on what you do. Things you do repeatedly are much more likely to change the brain than things you do only once in a while. You can't just show up some of the time and expect things to change. You need to find the right information for your brain and then feed that information into the brain constantly. Otherwise, the brain doesn't have any real reason to change. So I always think of the story of Ben Hogan. He was a golfer in the 1940s and 50s. He got into a terrible car accident. Okay? The peak of his career, he got into a car accident and he was head-on collision with a Greyhound bus. Now, what he did is, as the driver, he jumped in front of his wife to protect her from the impact. And because he was over in that position, the steering column crushed his pelvis, shattered his pelvis, he broke ribs, broke his collarbone, and developed really deadly blood clots in his legs. Now, when he was in the hospital bed, he wasn't able to practice his golf swing, and he was notorious for practicing swing after swing after swing until his hands would bleed. So when he's lying in the hospital bed, he actually visualized himself swinging that golf club the right way every single time. Well, what we know now in the research is that visualization of movement is just as powerful for the brain as actually performing the movement itself. And so he sat there and would do hundreds of thousands of swings every single day lying in his bed. Well, when he got out of the hospital and he went back to play golf, within 16 months, he had won the PGA Tour. And then 3 years later, in 1953, he won the Triple Crown. He won the US Open, the British Open, and the Masters tournament. Now, he didn't win the PGA Championship that year because at the time they had 36 holes you had to walk, and he wasn't healthy enough to walk that still. So he still couldn't walk a full 36 holes of golf, but he still won 3 of the biggest championships in the world for golf because he practiced and he practiced and he practiced. Now, he was known for basically blocking out the world and practicing. He wouldn't go to events or public signings of books or autographs or any of that stuff. He would practice and practice and practice. He is a consummate example of the power of consistency and repetition. Neuroplasticity requires 3 things that Ben Hogan mastered. Number 1, focused attention, so being able to fixate on a specific goal. He ignored all the other distractions. Number 2, repetition. He would swing that golf club until his hands would bleed. And then number 3, urgency. For him, he was making up for lost time, and that actually created a state of stress in the body that caused his nervous system to learn faster. Now, I'm not saying you need stress to learn faster, but for him, that worked out well. So if you can continually show up, continually do the work, it's not a matter of if you solve your problem, it's a matter of when. There's a double-edged sword here too, though. Consistency creates change, but practice makes permanent. What this means is that consistency could make change really, really good for you. Or if you're practicing the wrong things, it can make change really, really hard. If you're consistently playing the victim, if you're consistently inconsistent with your diet, if you're inconsistent with your training or your habits don't line up with who you want to become, guess what? You can actually reinforce the life that you don't want. So if you want to change your brain or how you move or how your symptoms show up in your life, you got to keep showing up day in and day out. Otherwise, your brain will resort to the patterns that it's learned through repetition. Otherwise, your brain will resort to the patterns that have become deeply embedded in your nervous system. Now, if you want to learn more about how to change your brain, be sure to subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all of the videos to come. And if you're interested in exploring ways to improve your nervous system and you want to get more information on how I do that with clients one-on-one, be sure to click the link below to find out.